There's a quiet lie sitting at the center of long-term care insurance. It doesn't scream. It usually arrives sounding careful, loving, even responsible. But once you see it clearly, you won't be able to unsee it. One quick thing before we dive in: if you're not subscribed, hit that button now. I think you'll want to stick around for what comes next. The real question isn't should you buy long-term care insurance. It's how you protect your life, your spouse, and your income if care ever enters the picture. Imagine someone selling you a raincoat for a storm that might come years from now. Then imagine they can raise the price later. Imagine the coat might not fit exactly when the storm arrives. Imagine paying for it anyway because the fear feels bigger than the details. That is how long-term care insurance gets sold to a lot of people. Now listen, I am not saying long-term care insurance is always bad. I am saying the way it gets presented is often badly distorted. It gets framed like the responsible answer, the mature answer, the loving answer. And that quiet lie can push you into a decision that slowly raises your stress instead of lowering it. Here's what you need to know. The trap is not the policy by itself. The trap is buying it before you understand your actual retirement foundation. The trap is thinking a policy creates safety when your cash flow is weak. The trap is treating fear like a plan. Think of your retirement in two piles. Not one giant scary number, two distinct piles. Pile 1 is income that shows up no matter what. Social security, pensions, rental income, maybe an annuity. Money that keeps coming whether the market smiles or sulks. Pile 2 is your savings, your 401k, your IRA, your brokerage account, your cash. Now here is the part most people miss. Long-term care insurance usually gets sold as protection for Pile 2. That sounds logical. But if Pile 1 is weak, the premiums can quietly chip away at your whole plan. If Pile 1 is strong, you may already have more protection than you think. Here's the thing. Most people are being told they are behind when they're not. Think of it this way. Your income floor is like the foundation of your house. Strong, underground, invisible, but holding everything up. Your savings are more like the furniture. Nice to have, comfortable, but the furniture sits on something else. Most people spend years polishing the furniture while barely checking the foundation. And the goal of retirement is not wealth. It is income. Most people walk into retirement focused on account balances. They look at their 401k, their IRA, their savings, and ask, is this enough? If the number feels small, they feel behind. Even when they are standing on top of something incredibly valuable. The goal of retirement is not wealth. It is income. That matters even more with long-term care, because care is not paid with pride. It is paid with cash flow. It is paid with flexibility. It is paid with a plan your spouse can actually use. A policy may help, but a policy is not the whole roof. It is just one tool. Let me show you what I mean. Let's meet two people. The first one is Frank. Frank is 67. He spent over 3 decades in a steady job. Nothing flashy. No huge bonuses. No lucky stock pick. Just consistency. If you saw Frank, you might assume he is financially behind. He lives in a modest home. He drives an older car. His clothes are simple. And if you looked only at his savings, you might panic for him. Frank has around $140,000 saved. By the standards you keep hearing, Frank is behind. But here is what you do not see when you only stare at that number. Frank has a monthly pension. He has Social Security income. His home is fully paid off. Every month, without touching his savings, money shows up. Consistently, predictably, quietly. Frank is not struggling. Frank is not stressed. Frank is living a life that works. Now let's meet Gary. Gary did everything right, at least by the usual rules. He saved aggressively. He invested diligently. He followed the benchmarks. Today, Gary has $800,000 saved. On paper, Gary looks like the winner, but Gary does not feel like one. Gary still has a mortgage. Gary has no pension. Gary depends heavily on his investment account to fund his life. Every market dip feels personal. And on top of that, Gary bought a long-term care policy years ago. The premium has crept up more than once. Every increase feels like another hand in his pocket. Gary has more money than Frank, but less peace. Let that sink in. It's not about who has more saved. It's about who has more certainty. That sentence matters more than most retirement slogans you have ever heard. Because long-term care insurance is often sold to people like Gary. People who already feel the silent pressure. People who want certainty so badly that they buy anything wearing a name tag that says protection. But some protection is expensive uncertainty in disguise. Here's a question. If you had to choose between more money or more certainty, which would it be? Keep that in your head as we go. Now listen carefully. The problem with traditional long-term care insurance is not hard to understand once you stop romanticizing it. You can pay premiums for years, sometimes for decades. Then premiums can rise. Benefits can be narrower than expected. Some people never use the policy. Some people try to use it and learn the triggers are more specific than they imagined. Some families discover there is a waiting period. That simply means time before benefits start. And during that time, the bills are still yours. That is why fear-based buying is dangerous. Fear sees only one picture. Fear sees a future nursing bill and panics. But a real plan looks at the whole table. Your guaranteed income, your savings, your spouse, your health, your family support, your home, your flexibility, your backup options. A policy may belong on that table, but it should not be the whole table. Think about a fire extinguisher in your kitchen. You want one. Of course you do, but you do not build your whole house around it. You do not ignore the wiring. You do not ignore the smoke alarms. You do not ignore the exits. Long-term care insurance can be like that extinguisher, useful in the right fire, not the entire safety plan. And here is where the industry gets slippery. It takes a real fear and stretches it into a universal answer. That is the quiet lie. Care risk is real, but that does not mean every policy is wise. It does not mean every premium fits your life. It does not mean your best move is the same as your neighbor's move. You are not behind. In fact, you may already be standing on one of the strongest financial foundations available today. If you have reliable income, modest expenses, and a paid-off home, you may already have what people with millions are searching for. That is not a motivational poster. That is math mixed with peace of mind. Think of Social Security like a faucet. Behind that faucet is a pipe you filled during your whole working life. Every paycheck helped build pressure in that pipe. The longer you wait to turn it on, the stronger the monthly flow. Turn it on at 62 and the flow is lighter. Wait until 70 and the flow is stronger. But here's the part many people miss. That faucet belongs to you. You paid into it. If you wait too long to turn it on, some of that water never reaches you. That does not mean 62 is always best. It does not mean 70 is always best. The question isn't what's the best age. It's what's the best decision for your life right now. If taking benefits earlier protects your savings, lowers your stress, or helps you avoid draining investments during a bad market, that matters. If waiting gives your spouse stronger survivor income later, that matters too. And yes, survivor income matters more than many couples realize. A marriage plan is like a two-seat canoe. It moves best when both people understand the weight balance. If one person is gone, the canoe does not simply keep floating the same way. One Social Security check may disappear. Some costs drop, but many do not. Housing stays. Utilities stay. Food does not get cut in half as neatly as people imagine. If you buy long-term care insurance and ignore survivor planning, you may protect one risk while exposing another. Here is a question for the married folks. Have you and your spouse ever actually talked about what happens if one of you is gone? That conversation matters. It matters even if it feels uncomfortable, because the real goal is not winning a spreadsheet. The real goal is making sure the surviving person can still breathe financially. Now think of a pension like an invisible asset. You cannot always see the big lump sum, but the value is there. It sits quietly under your plan, invisibly, steadily doing the heavy lifting. If someone offered to buy Frank's pension stream with cash, the number might surprise you. It could feel much larger than his savings account ever looked. But because it shows up as monthly income, many people dismiss it. That is a mistake. This is why blanket advice quietly erodes confidence. It treats everyone like Gary and ignores every Frank. It assumes account balance tells the whole story. It does not even close. Now let me show you another trick. Imagine walking onto a car lot. Every vehicle has a sticker price. Bold, official, intimidating. It looks final. But if you have ever bought a car, you know better. Nobody starts with the real price. There are discounts, timing advantages, negotiation room. The sticker exists to anchor your expectations. Retirement works the same way. That giant number people throw around is often your sticker price. The same thing happens with long-term care fear. You hear giant care cost estimates. You hear giant retirement targets. You hear giant warnings. And suddenly your brain decides you need a mountain of money and a policy on top. But most people do not need to fund every worst-case headline at once. They need to cover their real gap, their real life, their real home, their real support system, not someone else's sticker price. That is why the words, "you need at least this much," can be so damaging. They silently erode confidence. They make disciplined people feel reckless. They make secure people feel poor. They turn planning into performance. And that is exactly how bad products sneak in. Here's something to think about. If you found out today that you're actually on track, how would that change your week? It would probably change more than your week. It might change how you sleep, how you spend, how you talk to your spouse, how you think about work, how you think about buying another product you may not need. Now let us talk about inflation. Think of inflation like rust under the paint. You may not notice it right away. The outside still looks fine, but over time that slow damage spreads. Inflation is the silent eroder. It quietly raises groceries, medical bills, home repairs, and care costs. And yes, it matters for long-term care planning. But here is where nuance matters. Some long-term care policies offer inflation protection. That sounds great. Sometimes it is. But stronger protection often means higher premiums. Higher premiums mean more pressure on today's cash flow. And if those premiums rise later, the squeeze gets worse. That is why you do not buy based on fear alone. You buy based on trade-offs. Social Security has cost of living adjustments. People call those COLAs. That just means small raises meant to help with inflation. But those adjustments have limits. They help. They do not solve everything. Your pension may or may not have them. Many do not. So when you are building your plan, you cannot just ask what comes in today. You also have to ask what keeps up tomorrow. This is where long-term care insurance can turn into a trap. If the premium keeps rising faster than your income, it slowly steals flexibility. It quietly chips away at travel, at gifting, at hobbies, at simple breathing room. That does not show up in the sales pitch, but it shows up in real retirements. And then there is market risk. Let me give you an image. Picture a fruit tree during a dry summer. If you keep pulling fruit off early, while the branches are weak, the tree struggles more. Retirement savings can work like that. There is something called sequence of returns risk. That sounds technical, but it is simple. Bad market years early in retirement hurt more when you are also taking money out. That matters because Gary is not just paying living expenses from investments. He may also be paying long-term care premiums from investments. If the market drops early and withdrawals continue, the damage can stack up fast. A policy meant to create peace can end up increasing the pressure. It's not pessimism, it's realism. And in this case, realism isn't negative. It's empowering. Because once you see the moving parts clearly, you stop buying comfort words. You start making actual decisions. I also want to mention something that tells you a lot about how people misuse retirement tools. Years ago, many people leaned hard on a Social Security calculator without understanding what they were seeing. The estimate looked official, so they treated it like destiny. That became a problem. Rough tools can be helpful, but only when you use them correctly. The story matters because many people treat long-term care quotes the same way. They see a neat projection. They see a polished chart, and they forget the assumptions hiding under it. Numbers matter, but how you feel about those numbers, that matters just as much. If a plan looks perfect on paper but leaves you scared every month, that matters. If a policy checks every box but makes you feel trapped, that matters. If guaranteed income lets you sleep while a bigger account balance leaves you anxious, that matters. Think about this. If guaranteed income was the only thing that mattered, would you feel better or worse about where you stand? A lot of people would feel better, much better, because they would finally see the invisible asset already supporting them. And this is where the trap becomes obvious. Traditional long-term care insurance is often sold as the only responsible choice, but there are other ways to prepare. Some people build a larger cash buffer. Some use home equity carefully. Some choose hybrid policies. Those mix life insurance with care benefits. Some rely on strong guaranteed income and earmark savings for the gap. Some downsize. Some build family agreements. Some decide the premium burden is simply too heavy for the value offered. That does not mean every alternative is perfect. There is no perfect answer, but perfection was never the goal. You don't need perfection to have a successful retirement. You need clarity. Let me say something else that rarely gets said clearly. Most people underestimate their future expenses by a lot. Not because they are careless, because life is slippery. Home repairs show up. Dental bills show up. Travel pops up. Helping adult children pops up. Replacing a car pops up. Health expenses creep, nudge, and slowly raise the floor. So if you do choose any policy, long-term care or otherwise, it has to fit a plan with breathing room. Breathing room matters more than bravado. A retiree with a smaller nest egg and strong monthly income can be safer than a retiree with a giant account and too many moving pieces. That is why Frank can look poor and feel calm. Gary can look rich and feel fragile. I want to know, have you ever felt like you were doing everything right but still felt behind? You are not alone. That feeling is common because the system rewards anxiety. It rewards chasing. It rewards comparison. If the system only rewards you with almost enough, you will spend your whole life trying to close a gap that keeps moving. Stop measuring yourself against everyone else. Stop feeling behind and start focusing on what truly gives you freedom. Freedom is not owning every financial product. Freedom is knowing what your life costs. Freedom is knowing what money arrives each month. Freedom is knowing what happens if one spouse dies first. Freedom is knowing what happens if care enters the picture. Freedom is knowing which risks you are actually carrying and which ones you have already covered. You may already have what people with millions are searching for. Not because money does not matter. It does. But because certainty has value too. Simplicity has value. A paid-off home has value. A pension has value. Social Security has value. A spouse with a survivor plan has value. A modest lifestyle has value. These do not always show up as bragging rights, but they show up where it counts. So what do you do with all this? Here is what I want you to do. Start with your income floor, not your hopeful income, your real income. Look at Social Security. Look at your pension. Look at any steady rental income. Look at anything reliable. Write down what shows up every month, no matter what the market does. Then look at your real spending, not the fantasy version, not the version where nothing breaks. Look at what the last year actually cost you. Housing, food, insurance, medical care, taxes, travel, gifts, repairs, the little stuff that always returns. Most people underestimate by a lot. So be honest here. After that, find the gap. If your income floor covers most of your life, that changes everything. That gap is what your savings must cover. That gap is also what any long-term care strategy must respect. Not a headline number, not a scare tactic, your actual gap. Then talk to your spouse or your future self about care in plain language. Who helps first? Who manages bills? Which accounts get used? What home changes might happen? What gets sold if needed? What stays protected? If one spouse dies, what income remains? That talk may feel uncomfortable. Do it anyway. Silence is expensive. And then, if you are still considering long-term care insurance, price it against your life, not against your fear. Ask what the premium does to your cash flow today. Ask how rate increases would feel later. Ask what the waiting period means in real life. Ask what inflation protection costs. Ask whether the policy strengthens your plan or just gives you a nice brochure. That is the difference between buying coverage and buying a story. Let me ask you something. Do you know what your monthly income will actually look like when you retire? Be honest with yourself. If you do not know, start there. Not with the policy, not with the sales pitch. Start with the income. Because once your foundation is clear, your decisions get quieter, cleaner, stronger. And that is the real shift here. Long-term care insurance is not automatically a trap because it exists. It becomes a trap when it is sold like a cure for uncertainty. It becomes a trap when it drains a weak plan. It becomes a trap when it distracts you from the stronger levers already available. It becomes a trap when you buy it to calm fear instead of strengthen reality. You deserve better than that. You deserve a plan you understand, a plan your spouse understands, a plan that does not depend on crossing your fingers every year, a plan that respects both math and emotion. Because retirement is not lived on spreadsheets. It is lived on Tuesdays. It is lived in grocery stores, in doctor's offices, in kitchens, in quiet mornings when you decide whether to spend money without guilt. Quick question. Have you ever felt guilty about spending money in retirement? That feeling shows up more than you think. A lot of that guilt comes from uncertainty, and uncertainty loves vague plans. Clear plans weaken that guilt. Clear plans let you use money for what it is for. Safety, choice, dignity, joy. So no, the answer is not always buy the policy. And the answer is not always never buy the policy. The answer is deeper than that. The answer is whether the policy fits inside a retirement life that already makes sense. Whether it protects your spouse, whether it preserves flexibility, whether it supports your income floor instead of silently eroding it. That is the part they often will not say. Because it is harder to sell nuance than fear. But you do not need fear anymore. You need a clear lens. You need to see your retirement in two piles. You need to see your income floor like a foundation. You need to see big target numbers like sticker prices. You need to see inflation as rust. You need to see bad early market returns for what they are, and you need to see long-term care insurance as one possible tool, not a moral requirement. If the system only rewards you with almost enough, you will spend your entire life chasing more. But if you understand your numbers, if you build your income, if you define your life on your terms, you stop chasing. You start choosing, and that is the shift. From fear to clarity, from pressure to peace, from reacting to deciding. You don't need perfection to have a successful retirement. You don't need every answer today. What you need is awareness, clarity, and the willingness to face your real numbers. Because when you understand your income, your expenses, your spouse's future, and your actual care risk, something changes. You feel steadier, more confident, more at ease, and that is what retirement should feel like. If this video made you think differently about your retirement, subscribe. The next one goes even deeper.